Well, first of all, I want to welcome the chairman and the panel for being here today. I think it is a part of good government to go out and actually listen. And as Senator Corker said, it's a little hard for everybody to do that in Washington all the time. The issues you're talking about are critically important to us, and we're very, very grateful that you and all our so much of our congressional delegation would be here this morning.
Well, thank you, Governor, and we came here because Congressman DesJarlais is on the committee and asked us to come here, but also we came because of the work you've done. You've gone from being above the national average in unemployment to below the national average, and the success like that in Tennessee, even though it still hurts to have a 7.9% unemployment, we realize that it's the direction, the trajectory that we need to study. So the impediments to job creation that you mentioned are things we're taking back to the committee, along with Congresswoman Blackburn, who sits on Energy and Commerce, and Congresswoman Black, and of course the senators. So it's important to us that we learn from the job creators in the field, and we appreciate your attendance.
And I would just like to say I really appreciate everyone coming together. Today is about creating jobs, the #1 issue facing our country, and clearly we've had a great turnout of business leaders, and we have a second panel coming up that's going to be excellent. And clearly what's on the mind of people is how do we get this economy going, how do we get people back to work, and that's what today is all about. I thank everyone for their attendance.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean,
without us looking down.
Thank you. What I'm hearing a lot, or at least what I've heard a lot in there, is seems to me to be an attempt to maybe distance yourselves from what a Democratic Congress would be and what a full Republican Congress would be. Is what we're hearing in there sort of the message you're trying to send to voters in an election year that, hey, we're going to be different?
Well, I think one of the things that our committee has discovered over the last more than 2 years is that we didn't get broken overnight. EPA didn't suddenly become bad under just one administration or a lot of these other regulations. We might believe as Republicans it's accelerated in the last 3 years, but there's no question real reform and competitiveness is going to have to be a bipartisan effort.
And I would agree with that. Clearly this is a bipartisan issue, and the people who are going to benefit from what we're doing here today are people from all political persuasions, and it is not about Republicans or Democrats, it's about jobs and turning our country around.
Did you invite Congressman Cooper to be here today?
We did. This hearing was open to both Republicans and Democrats for, I guess, scheduling reasons. We didn't have any Democrats show up, but all of our hearings, this is just like Congress, we gavel them open with absolutely everybody available. We were very pleased to have Congressman Black and Congresswoman Blackburn come, even though they're not on the committee that's holding the hearing, and they were waived in because of their request.
What was the cost of this hearing?
Curious if all of you would join.
We don't have the final cost, but it was only economy seats and $99 overnight accommodation.
Curious if all of you would join Senator Alexander in supporting the EPA's clean air rule that they have support that they have proposed. Would Congressman or Governor or
Happy to look at that, and I'm sure we all are, and we'd get back to you without having those details in front of us. It would be hard to comment.
One of the challenges that we face is that we're the committee that has to make sure they comply with rulemaking authority. We don't necessarily comment on whether we like a rule or not, but our committee has found often shortcutting of the process. We want to make sure that they go through the science of the public hearing process. So whether we support something or not, the time and the effort needs to be exactly the same to make sure the public has an opportunity to weigh in.
To follow on that, Senator Alexander, maybe you can expand on this and maybe others care to as well. A good deal of what was talked about today is broad platitudes against government regulation, blanket stuff. And when you peel back the layers, there are always people who think there's good reason for something. The EPA demonstrates, what you said about that. Those two demonstrates that. How do you sort through that? You're trying to talk generally to people. It's understood where most people on this panel come from, but how can voters really evaluate whether or not you're making real decisions about regulations, with that as a jump-off point?
Well, I think that's the way people make most decisions. As I said, I think the EPA is a happy hunting ground of goofy regulations. But even a stop clock can be right twice a day, and on these 2 clean air rules, I think they are right for Tennessee, because TVA is going ahead and cleaning up our air, and the Nissan plant would be in Georgia, and the Volkswagen plant would be a vacant lot if we didn't make clean air a priority. So I think they expect us to differentiate between good rules and bad rules, and we may have different opinions about different rules, but the overwhelming problem right now is this avalanche of rules has thrown a big wet blanket over the American economy, making it harder and more difficult to create jobs. And in my remarks, I talked about the Medicaid mandate, I talked about the NLRB rule, I talked about the EPA rules. I would hope that any Republican administration would go in exactly the opposite direction in terms of most of the rulemaking that we see in this country, starting with repeal of the health care law and repeal of the Dodd-Frank Act.
In the second panel, you're going to hear about the regulation of dust, where farmers, just normal plowing, are being told that the dust that rises and then mostly falls back down on their own farm is somehow pollution. And of course, we all became aware of the request for predator overflights, because since they couldn't find the dust off the farm, they wanted to fly over the farm to find it. That would be an example where we all understand that tilling the soil, there's going to be a little dust, and yet EPA would have the American people believe that that's some sort of pollution that we have to clean up, or we're not going to have clean air. I mean, just as an example.
Back on the clean air regs that Senator Alexander supports, I've heard the coal industry is calling that a job killer. So who decides what the job killer is, and who decides whether it's good for the air?
Well, may I respond to that? So, I mean, in my view, putting pollution control equipment on coal plants, it makes about as much sense as putting headlights on your car. I mean, it's a part of the job. And in fact, TVA is going to do this anyway. Going to do it anyway, and TVA is going to burn a third of its it's going to make a third of its electricity from coal with pollution control equipment on their plants. So I think these rules, in effect, these two rules that I'm talking about, in effect secure coal's future in our clean air future by putting pollution control equipment on the plants. We have 546 coal mining jobs in Tennessee, and they're every one important. But so are the jobs at Nissan, so are the jobs at Volkswagen, so are the jobs of the other and other places. And every metropolitan area in this state is struggling to stay within the ambient air quality standards, and they drop out of it. They drop off the industrial recruitment sites.
Governor, do you anticipate any state regulations or rules that you're still changing or commissioning? Or have you pretty much finished that top 5 review and decided we've done enough?
Yeah, I think in the end of the process were, I guess, two feedbacks. On the state level, it was more about attitude than it was about regulations. Folks saying that it's about are the folks who work for the agencies trying to help us or trying to catch us, and we always want to be about trying to help them do the right thing. But the overwhelming majority of the feedback we got was about federal regulations. Bill, if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I agree, Governor. The regulatory review that Commissioner Foster undertook went across 12 different sites in the state. It was an extensive review, but by far and away, the majority of the burden that we feel here as Tennessee businesses is from federal regulations, and the panel today really did a great job getting at the heart of that matter.
I think the governor stated it very well today. The government doesn't create jobs, but it can create an environment more friendly to jobs. And I think that hearing from the job creators, it's not this group up here that is going to always come up with great ideas to solve these problems, but the people we're listening to in the next panel and in the roundtable discussion we had this morning really bring forth the ideas that are real world rather than the government, federal government, one size fits all.
I know the chairman's got to get back to convene in a second. Maybe one last question before we get back.
Governor, Chairman asked you about, Tennessee being able to do what it needs to do, minus so much of the money that also kind of comes sometimes with regulation, et cetera. Tennessee was one of the states that during the debt ceiling issue last year was, cited by credit groups as one that was very dependent on the federal government. How do you see navigating that?
Actually, I had a little quibble though with that. I mean, they actually were counting that as being because TVA's headquartered here and some other things. If you look at that, I'm not sure we actually were as far up that scale as they said we were.
Suffice to say, if less money is coming here, how much can Tennessee really deal with in terms of less federal money, the degree with which there is dependency?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know how to quantify your question. I do know, like I said, we've seen $1.5 billion plus come out of the budget in the last 2 or 3 years, and we've figured out how to make that work. I've told all of our agency heads to get ready for that. That I don't think Washington has a choice, but in general, to spend less money than they have in the past. I don't know how all this issue is going to work out. I know how I want it to work out, but regardless, I think there'll be less federal money coming to states like Tennessee. And so what we have to do is be prepared to deal with that, number one. And then number two, to say to the federal government, if you're going to do that, then you also need to send us less requirements for how we spend that money.
I think the important thing that we're dealing with in Washington is that no federal program costs less to administer than a state program here in Tennessee doing it. So ultimately, the value added of sending the money to Washington and then sending it back here, for example, your highway construction, if the dollars came back as a straight block with no strings attached, could Tennessee produce more miles and lanes of road for less money? And the answer, of course, is unequivocally yes. So part of the challenge with Washington is what we don't take from Tennessee, and Tennessee produces itself, if it can produce the goods or services for 70 or 80 cents on the dollar they're sending to Washington, then in fact, that lack of money coming doesn't even occur. So that's part of the challenge. Tennessee is not a poor state. Tennessee is not if you will, a net creditor state if you take out formula spending and federal bases. And let's understand, our military is counted in that figure. So the military bases in Tennessee, they act as though that's federal spending, and of course it's not. It's a discretion of the government. When we closed bases all over the country, that Tennessee was a good place to keep some of our premier Army units and Air Force facilities. So I think when you actually look at non-formula dollars, you find that Tennessee is very much a state that smaller federal government would benefit Tennessee's ability to provide its services for less.
Well, I appreciate that. Feels like a good place to end, Mr. Chairman. You have to come out. I
Thank
like
you
that
all.
word, Tennessee. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Governor.